my channel trying to convince me that Star Wars Legends was canon at one point, which Star Wars Legends, as we know, was never canon according to George Lucas, because George Lucas considered Legends the parallel universe. Although he did take ideas from the expanded universe, but that's not the same as considering the expanded universe ever being considered canon. George Lucas signed off on it, but that doesn't mean he considers it a part of his vision. So this Star Wars Archives book reveals some plans for George Lucas's sequel trilogy on page 500. Of course, this is an interview book based on Paul Duncan interviews with George Lucas. Paul Duncan was interviewing George Lucas, and it goes on to talk about the making of the prequel trilogy. But there's a paragraph over on page 500. Let me show you. I'm going to show you right over on 484. Let me get to it. All right. So it goes on right here. There is a passage right here where George Lucas talked about his plans for a third Star Wars trilogy. So for those of you out there who are saying, well, George Lucas only had vague ideas and that he never wrote stories for a sequel trilogy. Well, the part where he never wrote stories for a sequel trilogy may be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't have a vision for his own sequel trilogy. And this passage right here on page 500 and 501 and all the way up to 503. So page 500 through 503. You can see this. I'm not going to read it all for you. You can pause the video and read it for yourself. But it talks about George Lucas's plans for a sequel trilogy and how he intended for Darth Maul to be the main villain of the sequel trilogy and Darth Talon to be Maul's apprentice. Now, in the Legacy comics in Star Wars Legends, it shows Darth Talon appearing a century after Return of the Jedi, where in Lucas's version of the sequel trilogy, Darth Talon appears much earlier in the timeline and was the apprentice of Darth Maul. She wasn't the apprentice of Darth Maul in Legends and didn't appear in this part of the timeline in Star Wars Legends. So there is your proof. Legends was never canon.